Welcome to my channel, a safe place where we can dive into the strange and mysterious, true crime, makeup, and chill, with new videos every Sunday.
Warning, viewer discretion is advised.
Hi, welcome back to my channel, our safe space to talk true crime while I do my makeup at the same time. Man, I feel like it's been forever and a day since I've been here, and you know what? It kind of has. I'm sorry. I went MIA, like full MIA, didn't I? It was my mum's birthday. I had, just so much going on, and I'm sorry. I disappeared, but I'm back, baby. I'm refreshed. My cup is full, and here we are together. I also have like a really cute video to show you at the end of this. If you want to see what I've been getting up to, just wait around and I'll show you at the end. It's Halloween. I plan to do like a Halloween background, but as you can see, it's still the same. Enough blabbering, let's get stuck into it. All the products I will be using will be in the description below. Imagine finding out that your mother hid a shocking secret your entire life. That was the sheer truth for the Gray family. On the 8th of August 2012 in tropical Queensland, Australia, the Gray family were mourning the death of their mother, Merrill Juliet Palmer. Should do a quick foundation match. Hey, that looks all right. I haven't topped up my usual products, so I'm doing a little bit of mix, Merrill was known in the community as a beautiful Christian lady. Her forgiveness was unlike anything else, and her children knew that about their mother, but they didn't know how far that forgiveness actually went until the day they found a few dusty papers inside her wardrobe while cleaning it out. Merrill's 6 children had the daunting task of having to sort through her belongings. This was a tough enough task, let alone to find what they found that day. Hidden in amongst all the knickknacks and family photos were discolored prison release papers and yellowed news articles. But why was Merrill keeping such documents? As they began to read through, they noticed that the person in the articles had a striking resemblance to the man that they knew as their stepfather, or Poppy Cliff. Clifford Palmer was the name that they knew him as, but the name didn't match the papers that they found. The name on the newspaper clippings and prison papers were for a Clifford Bartholomew. Surely, right? Surely these couldn't have been the same person, could they? Poppy Cliff was known by his stepchildren as a good man. Although he wasn't their father, he treated them as his own. He did all things that an invested father would do. He read them storybooks before bed, taught them how to fish, and ironically, taught them right from wrong. You'll see why this is so terrifying when I tell you his story. The Gray children, they believed that there was absolutely no way that the two could be connected. I say kids, but they're like 30 plus at the time of finding this article in their mother's wardrobe, right? So this Clifford Bartholomew that they were reading about, he was a monster. Without their mother alive now to be able to confirm nor deny these claims, it was really hard for them. As much as they wanted to just erase what they had found from their thoughts and just pretend that they had never seen the papers, it was too late, and they had already unraveled one of the biggest family secrets of all time. And I'm sorry if I look ragdolled. I've been so busy, like my hair is, normally I style it for you when we catch up, but I'm here and I know you know. That's all that matters. Now, I'm just trying to be authentic with you guys and show you that social media can be a tricky platform, and quite often you see people dressed up to the 10s, to the 9s, whatever you want, however you want to say it. But they're always dressed up and you see them and you think, wow, they must look like that all the time. I'm telling you, sis, they don't. And if they do, they're lying or they're just very unhappy. Okay? Anyway, back to my story. So where were we? The family, they've revealed this big, huge secret. But what I have been thinking is like, was this planned? Was this how Meryl wanted to tell her secret? I don't know. Was this secret so huge that maybe possibly she couldn't get it out? I don't know. Or maybe they weren't meant to find the papers. Who knows? But anyway, it was an explosive secret. His story, Clifford Palmer's story, it shocked the Gray family to their core. And it goes like this. First of all, we know that Poppy Cliff is not his real name. It's Clifford Cecil Bartholomew. In 1971, he was age 40 and lived with his first wife, Heather Juliet Bartholomew, also 40. On the property lived their 7 children, and their ages ranged between 4 right through to 19. They lived in a 7-bedroom cottage on a farm in Hope Forrest, just south of Adelaide. To paint you a picture, the cottage was made out of old peeling white weatherboard and had a rusted tin roof. You know, the typical cottage farm. Hope Forest is in a small, quiet, rural town. And it's in Willunga, or just outside of Willunga, which, might I add, this place is like a 20-minute drive from my place. Why do all these freaky deaky things happen around here? Why? Because it keeps me up at night. It does. Anyway, the farm that the family lived on belonged to Clifford's boss, Mr. Smith. Clifford was a truck driver for Mr. Smith's excavation machines company. Does that make sense? He was a truck driver and he used, I think that makes sense. While Heather helped at the local dairy farm. Because Clifford worked for Mr. Smith, he allowed the Bartholomews to rent the premises for $6 a week, which was a great price back then, but an even better price in these days too. The farm was their safe haven, their happy place, but cracks began to form in their marriage, and it began to slowly disintegrate before it completely exploded on the night that changed everything. But we'll get to that in a bit. I'm getting ahead of myself. So the family, they were like any other family, right? They had their struggles, and one of those struggles was financially. The family, they were careful with what they spent their hard-earned money on. They had to be. I mean, with 7 children, life was expensive. A non-negotiable for Heather was that she could travel to see her little sister, Winnie Marie Keane, who was 23 years old. She would do this as often as she could by bus, which is a huge trip. Like, we're talking, how long did it take for Heather to get to Winnis? Let's have a look. So Winnis, who is Heather's little sister, she lived in Sydney. There we go. I got it out finally. She lived in Sydney, and she lived on an army base with her husband. It made sense because her husband obviously was in the army, and so instead of her having to leave him, she'd live with him on site. Now, Heather, she really enjoyed traveling up there to see her sister, so that was a non-negotiable. He had to make sure Clifford, we're talking about Clifford, had to make sure that they had enough money for her to go and see her sister whenever she wanted. Early 1971, for financial help, the Bartholomews, they took in a boarder by the name of Max. Max was in his early 20s and was a Vietnam vet. However, he was currently injured and needed a place to stay temporarily. The plan was for Max to move in with the family, recover from his injuries, and then when he was good enough and able to return to his duties, he was going to do that. But something felt off to Clifford, you know that feeling when something just doesn't feel right. So he began to notice little things, just little things that Heather was doing that made him feel uncomfortable. He began to notice that Heather was extra giggly around Max, especially because Clifford could barely get a smile out of Heather. Not to mention that Heather would do the family's washing, including Max's, but then leave Clifford's to the side for him to do himself. Around Easter time, Heather decided that she was going to visit her sister in Sydney. It wasn't just her suitcase and clothing that Heather was taking. She had decided to take Max with her. Also, strange, don't you think? I mean, he's in his 20s and maybe, just maybe, Heather felt sorry for Max, seeing as her eldest son was around the same age. I don't know, who knows? But Heather would call Clifford and check in with him to see how he's coping with the kids. And she would even write letters to the kids too while she was away, right? So the week that Heather was due to come home, she contacted Clifford with bad news. Apparently there was a mix-up with the buses and there was no scheduled bus heading to Adelaide that day. He was frustrated. I mean, fair enough. 7 kids working full time, that would have been hardcore. So on the flip side though, Clifford, he was ecstatic because he got a tax return. Do you know how much it was? It was $100. And back then in the 70s, it was a lot of money. We're talking enough to buy a secondhand car. So that's what he did. He took his money, he went to the car yard, and he purchased the family a second-hand set of wheels and waited patiently for Heather to return to Adelaide so that he could pick her up in their new ride. So the day comes that Heather and Max return to Adelaide and Clifford drives the car to the bus stop to collect them. Now, remember how I was saying how the family, they were really careful with what they spent their money on and how really they only spent their money on what the family deemed as non-negotiables like food and rent, Heather's bus trips to see her sister. Well, it was safe to say that when she seen Clifford pull up in this car, she was not impressed. You know when you have like pissed someone off, right? You can just tell the body language, the side eyes. This was not at all the reaction that Clifford thought he was going to receive, and it really hurt him. Heather was cold towards Clifford, and the drive home must have been super awkward, especially for Max, who could probably feel the tension in that car. Now, if it wasn't awkward enough, you know what Heather did? She went on to tell Clifford about all the fun that her and Max had in Sydney with her sister Winnice and her husband. She was telling Clifford about how drunk she got and how she danced on tables until the early morning. She got so drunk that she could barely stand straight and had to be put to bed. This was unusual behavior, according to Clifford, who thought his wife didn't drink. And here she is now in a different state with a younger man going hard, drinking and partying. The three, they pull up to the farm in their new car, and then Heather runs inside the home where she is greeted by her children. She gives them all a huge hug and plenty of kisses and just tells them how much she missed them. Now, in that moment, Clifford couldn't help but side-eye what he was seeing, and he noticed that his greeting from Heather didn't go at all like that of the children's. Later found by police at the crime scene was a journal that Clifford used to write in and get all his thoughts and feelings out on paper. Well, in this journal, there was an entry that spoke about the day that Heather got home. Written was also a statement about their first night together after Heather had been away for a couple of weeks, and it said that the romance they had in the bedroom that night, it wasn't very good. He just felt as if Heather wasn't really interested or her mind was elsewhere. This is when Clifford began to wonder if there was a little more going on between Max and Heather than they had been playing out, because she was so warm and kind and full of energy towards him. But to Clifford, her energy was just off and cold, like she just didn't want to be around him. These thoughts began to fester, and it got to the point that he just had to say something to Heather. But when he did, Heather just shut that conversation down, quick smart, and said that he was just being silly and he was imagining things. Now, in 1971, Clifford got temporarily laid off by Mr. Smith, and that was because Hope Forrest, where they lived, received a lot of rain, which meant there wasn't a lot of work for Mr. Smith's excavating, which meant there wasn't a lot of work for the excavating business that Mr. Smith owned, his boss. So he was temporarily laid off. Now, Australia is pretty generous when looking after people who fall on tough times, and there's a bunch of benefits that you can claim. He was on the unemployment payments, which definitely assisted with making his life a little easier. But again, with 7 children, rent, maintaining his new car, money was tighter than ever before. I don't know if I should do color because I'm so bored of like doing the same look. What do you think? Color? Cool. Which color? Who knows? Let's just roll with the punches. Clifford's life, it was beginning to spiral, and he began to fall into a deep depression. No work, financial issues, wife issues, you name it. Clifford was going through it. Do you remember that old saying? Happy wife, happy life. Well, Clifford must have thought that if he could get back into the good books with his wife, that things might start turning around. He began helping around the house more, helping with the kids. He would bring Heather breakfast in bed. And although they didn't have a lot of money, he went out and purchased Heather a beautiful brand new watch. Guess what? None of the things he was trying to do were helping. Nothing was working. She was just so far off him that nothing he could do seemed to help win her back. So he felt hopeless. He made an entry into his journal saying that he just knew that Heather and Max had slept together. There was this feeling in his core, and although there was no hard evidence, he just had that feeling. I mean, at the time, they needed money. Max was giving it to them for staying at the farm, but now Clifford was beginning to think, like, was this worth it? Was the sake of their marriage and this financial assistance coming in, was it worth it? Was it worth it? One day, the couple, they got into a huge argument. It was really bad. Clifford decided that he needed time away from Heather, everyday chores, this Max guy. He needed just a break. Ugh, what a horrible situation and feeling to be in, So he decides to head to Port Lincoln, which is on the coast of Adelaide, but it's about a 7-hour drive. In his mind, right, he's thinking, Clifford is thinking, if I leave, Heather will miss me and realize all the things that I do for her and the family. So when he told Heather that his plan was to go to Port Lincoln, you know what? She was thrilled. She told Clifford to stay as long as he wanted to. He packs his things into a suitcase. He says goodbye to the kids and puts his things into the car. And just before he's about to pull away from the house, he remembers that he'd left something inside. He had forgotten something. And so he runs back inside to grab it. When he gets inside, he couldn't believe his eyes. Max is laying down, and on top of Max is Heather. Yeah, they're both giggling, and do you know what Max says? He turns to Clifford and says, I was just tickling her. Okay, buddy. Like, what? They couldn't even wait till he fully left before fooling around. So what does Clifford do? He calls Max outside. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? Clifford is about to give Max the beating of his life. But as sad as it is, Clifford just turns around to him and says, quote, just cut it out in the future. Now, I do not in any way, shape or form condone what Clifford is about to do in the story at all. But I also can't help but feel a little sorry for him. I know he's stuck in this dirty feeling that if he reacts like how he wants to, Heather would surely leave him. He's trying to fix things. You have to ask yourself, like, how far are you willing to go to fix a relationship? You know what? Clifford still decides to go on the trip to Port Lincoln. He gets into his car and he leaves the property. Now, when Clifford gets back, it's like he never left. Things are worse than ever before. The arguments, the cold shoulders. It's one uncomfortable home to be living in during this time. You know, I just feel sorry for the kids in all of this, hey? Like their arguments got to the point where they would be yelling at the top of their lungs. In one argument, Clifford threatened to shoot himself and the children. Disgusting, gross, putrid. And then Heather just responded that she couldn't care less. Like a dagger to the heart, right? She just twisted that shit. The next week, Heather decided to go back to Sydney and see Willunga again. But this time she left Max at the cottage with Clifford and the kids. This video may seem like it's all together, but my doorbell rang and I had to cook dinner because one of my lights went out. You might notice this one here went out. It's charged now. And so I've eaten and it's been about 2 hours since I hit record. So let's keep going. The next week, Heather decided to go back to Sydney and see Willunga again. So with Heather gone, Clifford looked after the kids and the farm. No rest for the wicked. One particular day, while checking the mailbox, he noticed a letter for Max. But the handwriting looked suspiciously coincidental to Heather's. He bloody tore that letter open quickly, and what he read broke his heart. In the letter, it was expressing her feelings for Max. Clifford took the letter inside and confronted Max, and you know what? He didn't deny anything. Max was embarrassed and he apologized and packed up his things and then left the farm. Now, Clifford, he was livid. And if you don't know, livid is like when you're really pissed off. You're upset, okay? So he's livid, right? He's really mad. And I'm actually really surprised that he didn't go buck wild on Max. Clifford, he just got into the car and drove all the way to Sydney to the army barracks where Heather was staying with her sister to confront her about the letter. When Clifford got to the army barracks and confronted Heather about the letter, she just said that her and her sister got really drunk and thought that it would be funny to send the letter and that it was only a joke. Clifford, he was trying so desperately to save his marriage that he just decided to believe her. After the discussion, Heather packed up her belongings and headed back to the farm with Clifford. Can you imagine that ride home? It would have been so bloody awkward. Now, with Max gone, you would think that this would improve their relationship, but it only got worse. To make things more awkward, Heather's sister Winice, she moved from Sydney to Hope Forrest with her 18-month-old son and her new boyfriend. Officers, they found another journal entry stating how Clifford hated seeing Winice and her new boyfriend together because they would often be super affectionate with one another. I mean, they're in a new relationship, so of course that's going to happen. But Clifford hated seeing that because that was just something he wanted so bad from Heather and he didn't get it from her. So in late August, Heather and Clifford, they had yet another huge fight, and this was the final straw for Clifford, who packed up his things and decided to move in with his mother. I have got no idea what I'm doing, but I've got a colourful palette here and we're just going to go with the flow. So if it looks like poo-poo, then that's okay. On his way out, Heather said to Clifford that she was grateful for all that he had done for her and the kids, but she just lost all feelings for him. I mean, that sucks. That must have really hurt him. But I mean, that's how she felt. She couldn't help that's how she felt. So, I get both sides. Breakups are never easy. Anyway, Father's Day was approaching in a few weeks, and so Heather invited Clifford over to spend some quality time with the kids. I mean, that's what Father's Day is all about. Spending time with your children, having fun, enjoying your day. It's Sunday, September 5th, 1971. You know how normally the dad, receives gifts for Father's Day? Well, Clifford, he rocked up to the farm and he was the one bringing gifts to the children. That's what I mean. The story is strange, but he's the doting father, and then next minute, he is the worst mass murderer in Australian history. So the gifts that Clifford brought were lollipops and fizzy drinks for the younger kids, but for his oldest son, he gifted him a .22 caliber rifle, and through all this heartache, he didn't forget Winice or Heather, buying them a bottle of rum to share, and he bought himself a case of beer. They were going to have a drink or two together, It was going to be a fun and exciting Father's Day get-together, something the family had needed for so long. Not even just the family, but, for Clifford, he desperately needed it just as much as they did. Now, when he arrived at the farmhouse on Father's Day, the only person who was home was their oldest son, Neville. Clifford was so mad. He was livid. He just felt like he had been invited over all for what? For his family to disrespect him? He decided to wait at the farm for his family to return. While he waited, he had a conversation with Neville, who told Clifford his worst fear. Something he had been told that he was imagining all along. Neville told his father that his mother was moving the kids to Adelaide to start fresh and that she was getting a job as a waitress to support them all. But to rub more salt in his wounds, can you guess who they were moving in with? Yep, Max. After a while, the family returned home to the farm, and only their youngest child, who was 4 years old, ran up to Clifford to greet him. The rest of the family just went about their business. Although he was now armed with this information, he kept it to himself, and they sat around the dinner table and had dinner together. He would have been cutting his steak so hard. I mean, that's not funny, but can you imagine knowing that and you're like trying to eat your dinner? I'd be breaking plates. But can you imagine what he was feeling knowing this and just pretending he didn't know? So after dinner, Clifford and Neville sat at the table and had a couple of beers together while watching TV. Before he left, he just thought to himself, I've got one last opportunity to talk to Heather to see if he can make any difference or they can rekindle anything. He went into the bedroom where Heather was and he started talking to her about how he was feeling and what he had found out from Neville. She told him that there was nothing he could do. There was no chance of reconciliation and nothing he could do or say could fix their relationship. She was happy for Clifford to keep seeing the children in Adelaide, but there was one condition. He was not to interfere with her private life. Soon after the conversation, Clifford headed back to his mother's where he had been staying since moving out of the family home. He had just hoped for the day to have gone so much better than what it did. Once again, he was left sad and disappointed. That night, as he lay in his bed, tossing and turning, thinking about all the things that had happened that day and the weeks before, he got to thinking like what his life would be without seeing his children daily. To have to travel to see them in Adelaide at Max's house. And the more he thought about it, the more he got angry. After stewing on these thoughts, he decided to get up out of bed and head back over to the farm. My hair just keeps getting messier and messier, but we're not here for that. We're here for the story. Should I put that green? Let's do it. Let's just do it. His plan was to knock Heather unconscious and then drag her out to the shed where his ultimate plan was to shoot and kill her. He was going to use the gun that he had purchased for his son Neville because he'd actually forgotten to give it to him earlier that day. Forgotten, right? Forgotten to give it to him earlier that day, and it was still sitting in the backseat of Clifford's car. Clifford thought that without Heather there to take the kids away, that they would be all his and they would live happily ever after. Now, we all know that that plan sounds horrible and is most likely going to end up in a prison sentence and him never seeing his children again. But to Clifford, it all made sense. He got into his car and arrived shortly after at the farm. Clifford snuck into the shed that was located on the property and found a rubber mallet and some ammunition to load up the rifle. Then he snuck into the house through the back door and stood in the hallway, leaning the .22 caliber rifle against the wall before entering the bedroom where Heather was sleeping. As Clifford got closer to the bed, he saw someone sleeping next to Heather. It was his daughter, Sandra Jane. Do you think this would change his mind? If you said yes, then I'm sorry to tell you that it didn't at all. Clifford picked up the mallet, raised it above his head, and struck Heather on her head. In his mind, the plan was to strike her unconscious, right? But it didn't go to plan, and Heather woke up screaming from the searing pain that was coming from where Clifford had hit her. She was screaming out to her sister, Winnie, who was asleep in the other room with her 18-month-old son. As she screamed for help, Clifford swung again, but this time the heavy blow to her head rendered her unconscious. He said to officers in an interview that Heather screaming for help and seeing the look of disgust on her face made him snap. While all of this was going on, Winnie came running in. She saw Clifford and turned to run away. As she did, she spotted the rifle that Clifford had left out in the hallway, grabbed it and took it with her outside, running out from underneath the tin veranda. She was trying to make it to the car so that she could go and get help, but Winnie, she wasn't quick enough. Clifford chased after her. When he caught up to her, he struck her over the head with the mallet before he grabbed the rifle and shot her in the back of the head, killing her instantly. After killing Winnie, he headed back into the house to finish what he had come to do. As he walked back into the bedroom where Heather still lay unconscious, he shot her multiple times in the head. Don't forget, all meanwhile, his children have woken up terrified for their lives. This is when the oldest son, Neville, comes inside from his sleep out that he stayed in out the back of the farm and began fighting with Clifford, trying to disarm his father. Clifford overpowered him and he struck Neville in the head with the mallet before knocking him out into the hallway. As Clifford looked up, he locked eyes with his 17-year-old daughter, Christine, who was standing next to Heather's bedroom door, saying, quote, "Don't, Daddy, don't." Clifford picked up the rifle, put it to her head, and just like that, he pulled the trigger. How can you do that? Like, how can you do that to your own child? Especially when one is begging you to stop. Like, I just don't get it. He did the same to Sharon, who was 15, and Roger, who was 7. Neville was still laying on the floor where he was beginning to regain consciousness. Clifford walked over to Neville and pulled the trigger. Clifford then walked back into Heather's room where his youngest children were hiding, too scared to move or make a sound. Heather 13, Gregory 11, and Sandra Jane, just 4 years old, staring into their father's eyes before he lifted the rifle and shot them all one at a time, point blank. That is just so messed up. Clifford had now completed what he had come to do and some. He turned to make his way to the kitchen when he suddenly remembered that Winnie's 18-month-old baby Danny was asleep in his bassinet. And you already know what he did. I don't even have to go into detail, but you already know what he did. And Danny was the last member of the family to be killed. As Clifford made his way to the kitchen to take some aspirin and pour himself glass of sherry, he remembered just standing there and holding the rifle. He knew that he had done something wrong and that he had spiraled, and there was nothing that anyone could have done to have stopped him. Clifford took a moment. He sat down, poured himself some more sherry before returning to the bloody scene. He couldn't stand looking at his family that he had wiped out. He found some blankets and covered their lifeless bodies. He then walked back into the kitchen and then he called the police. When they arrived, they found Clifford sitting in the kitchen with an empty bottle of sherry and a scene that was more horrifying than any horror movie. During police interviews, he told investigators that he only planned on killing his wife, but then he went on to blame Winnie for his marriage falling apart. Officers couldn't understand why he killed his kids, but Clifford's explanation didn't shed any light on the situation either. He told police officers, quote, "Once I had killed Christine, I realized I had to kill them all. I couldn't leave any of them behind. I loved my children too much." Clifford was then trialed at the Supreme Court in Adelaide. Oh man, like I got no words. But I don't understand how somebody can do that to children. Hey, like it's just, what are you thinking? Well, obviously he's not. He did say he wasn't thinking and just went into overdrive. Clifford was trialed at the Supreme Court where he was trialed for murder and was sentenced to death on November 23rd. Good, right? Yeah? Well, do you know what happened? What Clifford did next? As they all do, they try and appeal their sentence. His lawyers stated that it was totally out of character for Clifford to do something like this and that he was normally a good man, claiming that Clifford was insane at the time of the murders due to clinical depression. But the judges, they just kind of laughed and were like, no, we got it right. No. So Clifford, he was imprisoned in Yatala Labour Prison in Adelaide and sentenced to death by hanging. However, as he served his sentence, waiting for his time, something wild happened. The South Australian laws had changed and capital punishment was abolished in 1976. Clifford's sentence was then changed to life imprisonment. But how's this though? This is where it gets messed up. And this is where I was like, after spending only 7.5 years behind bars, on December 10th, 1979, Clifford was released on parole. I know. Safe to say the people of South Australia, they were so mad. That's not even 1 year per child, for crying out loud. It makes me so mad to even like, how is that a possibility? But do you know what's even more creepy? After Clifford Bartholomew got out of jail, he just vanished. Never to be seen again. Poof, gone. Can you imagine how creepy that must have been to have lived in South Australia during the time of his release, not knowing if the man standing behind you in the line at the shops could be Clifford Bartholomew? So how did Clifford end up in Queensland with the new love of his life, Meryl? Well, when he began a new life in 1983, their mother, Meryl, married Clifford Palmer. She already had 6 children from her previous marriage, so it was like he got a second chance at raising a family as big as the one that he lost. One of his sons, Ralph, had described Cliff as a gentle man, saying, quote, "He loved us and we loved him." It was only when their mother passed away in 2012 that the children that he helped raise found the papers in their mother's wardrobe. Clifford Palmer passed away in 2002 at the age of 72. Now, I have a few questions. Was Meryl truly in love with Clifford, or was there a point where she was just too frightened to leave or argue with him? Afraid of what he might do to her and her children? I don't know. I guess that's a question only God knows the answer to. Now, I've been trying to do something with my hair, but girl, what are we thinking about this eye look? Very demure, very mindful. Anyway, again, sorry for not having a video last week. I had a lot going on, work, family stuff, life. I know, excuses, but I appreciate you for tapping this video and always showing love. Now, in the beginning, I promised to reveal something super cute, and it's a video of my mum being reunited with her sister. She had no idea the family got together and we surprised my mum at her home. Here's the video. I'm not crying, you're crying. We had such a fun time and I had all the family stay here. So, you know, when they left, I felt so lonely, but, you know, life goes on. It's given me more motivation to really succeed in my YouTube career expedition, just so that I can see them more often. And yeah, as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you like this week's look. If you like this video and you haven't already, please don't forget to hit the like button. And if you really, really liked it, maybe you can hit the subscribe button so we can hang out again. Well, that's all from me. Until next Sunday. Have a safe and happy week. And remember, you take care out on those streets, girl. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, sis. You know, we can keep hanging out if you want to. All you have to do is tap this true crime and makeup playlist.